It's a Friday night. It's the most awful night outside. I've made myself a cup of tea, so what better to do than to discuss 7 reasons why I think the GH5S rocks. Okay, so this week Panasonic announced the release of their highly anticipated GH5S camera. A lot of people think that this is a successor of the GH5, but it's not necessarily. Panasonic have done a similar thing here to what Sony did with the A7R2 and the A7S2, in that they have 2 similar cameras with slightly different capabilities, one of them having a smaller pixel count on the sensor. This is what Panasonic have done. Now the camera is priced at about $500 more than the existing GH5, and it's supposed to be available as of next month. Now it's got different features to the GH5, okay? The main one being that the sensor has less pixels, and that might sound like a negative thing. It could be a negative thing in terms of photography, but in terms of videography, which Panasonic seem to have aimed at here, it's actually a better thing. There are fewer pixels and they are larger pixels, meaning that they should take in more light, which is pretty much one capture pixel, one output pixel. True 4K, 60 frames a second in DCI, that is 4096 by 2160, and it can output in 422 10-bit as well. So that's all good. Now I recently got the Atomos for the Panasonic, so I'm not overly worried about the 10-bit thing at the moment because I can kind of cover that with the Atomos. Okay, so you might have heard at this stage, unless you have been hiding under a rock, that the GH5S does not have in-body camera image stabilization, sensor stabilization, which basically means that the sensor will move around in correspondence to correct the jitters that you have in your hands and stabilize the footage. And I gotta say, having used it in the GH5, it is absolutely fantastic, particularly when you use a lens like what I've attached here, which is a Sigma 50 to 100mm lens, which does not have any stabilization, and it means that the camera will stabilize the image, because a lens like this with no stabilization will introduce a lot of micro jitters into the footage. So the stabilization of this is nuts, especially when you're taking photographs and you move around. You can just really see it locking down the image. It feels like it's on a tripod. It's really good. So without that, that is a big negative. But not having stabilization isn't always a bad thing, because in a lot of scenarios where you've got the stabilization switched off, such as tripod shots, slider shots, maybe even gimbal shots, you are actually better off. So IBIS is not always a good thing. If you're shooting with the GH5 and you have the GH5S as a second camera, then you got the best of both worlds. So that is reason number 1. The second reason I have is that the camera is much better in low light than the GH5. I mean, it's a pretty obvious one. They're saying that it'll shoot up to 52,000 ISO without introducing much noise. I don't know if that is going to be true, because this camera, when you shoot at 1600 ISO, you know, it starts to really introduce a lot of deterioration in the noise. And that is the biggest negative with the GH5, is the noise in that camera. I just don't like it, how noisy it is. So for me, what would interest me in the GH5S would be lower ISOs having less noise, how clean the image is. Say at ISO 400, 600, or 400, 800, 1600, a clean image at those ISOs would be more beneficial to me than being able to go up to higher ISOs. So that would be a good thing. They are saying that it's dual ISO, that it reads out 2 images or something to introduce more dynamic range. I don't really understand the ins and outs of that, but it's obviously a big reason. So I've that down as reason number 2. Bigger pixels, more light, a much brighter camera than the current GH5. Now bear in mind that, you know, you might be thinking that this is better. There were comparisons compared to the Sony A7S2. The Sony A7S2 has a full frame sensor, which is a ridiculously big sensor compared to a Micro Four Thirds sensor. It's basically 4 times bigger than an MFT sensor. So it's never going to compete with the Sony, but it has other better features than the Sony. Another reason to get the GH5S is it comes with pre-installed Vlog. If you want to get Vlog currently for the GH5, you have to order it from Panasonic. You pay about €100 or something like that, and then they have to send it out to you, and it takes a couple of weeks. They send it to you in a box, and you get this encryption code that you have to install on your camera. It's absolutely stupid, and I don't know why in this day and age they can't just do it a simpler way than that, okay? Another benefit of the GH5S is that the mic socket on the GH5S is powered. It's not powered on this one. It's powered on the GH5S, meaning that you can use microphones like Sennheiser 416 and these big, broadcast industry standard microphones that might be powered, and you can just go straight into the line in on the camera and not have to worry about using like a field recorder or something like that. That is hugely beneficial. The only downside, I guess, is that you're using a mini jack connection, which isn't the most robust connection there is. Getting a big XLR connection would be a pain in the arse on a camera this size. That is very cool. Now, another thing I really like about the GH5S is its frame rate capabilities. Currently, this guy will shoot up to 180 frames a second. I actually haven't even done high frame rates in this camera other than 4K at 60. So the high frame rate capabilities of the GH5S is up to 240 frames a second. Now it'll go up to 200 uncropped, but if you go over 200 frames a second, it crops down on the sensor. That's how it works. So you're gonna have to use a wider lens. It mightn't be the end of the world, but it's worth having, and it's nice to have. 240 frames a second is pretty fast, so if you're filming stunts, sports stuff, whatever. Another reason that I think you should go for the GH5S is if you currently own a GH5, having the GH5S and the GH5 as your two work cameras is going to be hugely beneficial, okay? Because in a lot of scenarios like what I do, a lot of work scenarios, you're going to be using two cameras. So it's obviously very beneficial to have the GH5 and the GH5S because you have the best of both worlds. You have the higher pixel count here on the GH5, which is good for photography, for more detailed high-end photography images. And of course you have the image stabilization, okay? And then of course you have your GH5S, which you can use indoors in darker situations. If you have the two cameras together, you're gonna have a lot of options there. So you gotta remember that guys like me, videographers who work full-time, you're not usually using just one camera. So I see guys expecting the GH5S to be the successor of the GH5 and selling their GH5. It's not the intention of Panasonic to have done that, to be replacing the GH5, and a lot of people get that wrong. Perhaps if they'd named it something different, it might have been better, but it's such a similar camera that they actually called it the GH5S. So the final reason you should buy the GH5S, okay, it's a bit of an all-round reason, but it is a great camera. It is the GH5, but improved, and it is a fantastic price. It is hugely cheaper than Canon alternatives. Canon have nothing that comes close in that price range, and Sony is far more expensive as well. Blackmagic have nothing that come close. Other brands have nothing that will give you that power for that price. So I do believe that the GH5S, priced at $2,500, 2,500 euros, is a fantastic camera. You know, regardless of the image stabilization. Think about it, it's a fantastic camera. How many cameras do not have image stabilization? Reds, Blackmagic cameras, Arris, they do not have stabilization. It's only now, since this one had it, that we expect these cameras to have in-body stabilization from here on in. So there are my legitimate reasons I would seriously consider selling some of my cameras like what I'm filming this one on right now and getting another GH5, which will be the GH5S. So you gotta look at the options, guys. Buy the GH5S. I think it's a great camera. Thanks for watching, and please come back for more videos and more stuff like that. I'm rather tired now. It's getting late. This is my living room. Thank you for watching. Check me out on the socials, on Facebook, Instagram, and all these guys. And do come back. I've got weekly videos now. So peace. I'll see you again. Bye.